Hey everyone, welcome to your presentation on body image. In this discussion today, we're going to be talking about what helps frame our body image and what we can do to then start to shift it and change it. My name is Abby Chan. I'm a registered dietitian with my bachelor's and master's degree in nutrition and dietetics. I'm also a registered yoga teacher and have over 15 years of teaching and coaching underneath my belt in a variety of different modalities. I'm also the co-owner of Evolve Flagstaff, which is an integrated facility that encompasses physical therapy and injury prevention, nutrition counseling, performance training, as well as meal prep. So, what is body image? Body image is how you see and perceive yourself. It is what you believe about your own appearance. So, this could be from memories, assumptions, and other generalizations. And generally, this starts pretty early. Think of all the little things that people have said to you throughout the years that are maybe and most likely untrue, but still impact you to this day. Earlier this week, I threw out on my Instagram just a poll of trying to gather some information on what are some of these things that have stuck with people. And so some of these offhanded comments that maybe people probably don't even remember making have actually lasted years, sometimes even 30, 40 years with people, and it still impacts them to this day. So some of these things are saying that someone has thunder thighs, or that their legs are a problem spot, or that they're husky when they were a kid. And all of these things have impacted not only females, but also males and how they see and perceive and experience their body. Body image is also how you feel about your body. So this is the weight, shape, and size. This also may be about or because what other people have said to you, and it may be either positive or negative. Body image is also how you feel in your body. It's how you experience your body. It's how you feel your way through life, how it moves, how it feels through movement, how you feel with certain textures of things on your body. So people with possibly OCD may hate certain textures versus others. So all of these are also encompassed in how we perceive our bodies, how we see our bodies, and then what makes up our body image. So I want you to just take note here is just a few of these pictures. So obviously body dysmorphia is huge, and a lot of your questions that were given to me were around body image and also how we perceive our bodies. I know that body dysmorphia is very, very real. Body dysmorphia is basically seeing something else in the mirror than what is actually true. And so obviously in this picture on the far left, it's a very, very drastic picture of the difference. But know that even these little things of if you're mirror checking on the day-to-day basis, and if you're looking at if your stomach or legs look bigger on one day opposed to another day, that's not a really good indication of actually if your body's changing or not, because your bodies will change every single day on a day-to-day basis. And also know that body image and struggling with body image is not just a quote unquote female problem. So this impacts all genders. So male, female, trans, everyone who's in a body know that body image impacts them. But especially from a masculine perspective, it's most likely just going to look a little bit different than from a more female identifying perspective. So a lot of times with males, it's focusing on the hyper masculine identity around what it is to be male. And especially for those who are trans and transitioning to male, it's a lot of that same stigma as well. Body image is often distorted by our fat phobic culture and our very, very, very narrow view of what is quote unquote acceptable. And knowing that whether it be hyperfeminine, hypermasculine, or anywhere in between of the spectrum of what your body quote unquote should or should not look like, these are all just social constructs that we've created that the media has then run with and completely blown out of proportion. So I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. And I want you to think about some words and phrases and maybe images of what health means and is to you. All right, so you probably have a bunch of images and thoughts and ideas going through your head, so I'm going to stop you real quick and just define health from its true definition. Health is a state of well-being that is free from illness or injury. That is all, full stop. And how we define health at Evolve is health encompasses not only our physical health, but our mental health, our physiological health, as well as our social and community health. So let's start off with weight does not equal health. I'm going to say that again, that weight does not equal health. There have always been quote unquote obese and quote unquote overweight people in our world since the beginning of time. Just look through the Louvre Museum in Paris, France, or any other art history book, and you will know that there have always been idealized body shapes and sizes, and that they've changed through every generation and depending on what culture you're in. And I want to note that if we all ate the same and moved the same, guess what? We would still look very, very different. And this is mostly because of our genetics. We live in an extremely fat-phobic world where we make assumptions about people's actions, value, and worth based on their size and their shape of their body. Does this sound familiar to you? If I were to make an assumption and maybe clutch my purse while I was in an elevator when I was with someone of color, that's me making an assumption based on what they may or may not do to me just by the appearance of their body. So know that fat phobia and racism are deeply, deeply entrenched. And I want to start to really peel back those layers of both of these things as we start to move forward today. And so you may be really confused of how weight doesn't equal health, because that's basically the script we've been told. Weight is often correlated with adverse health outcomes, but it is never the root cause. The root cause is always the healthful behaviors that we either do or do not do. And by assuming someone is unhealthy based on their size and shape is fat phobic and clearly incorrect. Did you know that your weight is determined by your genetics, race, and socioeconomic status? Let's break this down. So BMI, we've all heard of it, body mass index. While it's basically shit, it's also hyper racist and incorrect. So it was created in the late 1800s by a white male statistician, and he was just trying to make some generalizations based on his population, which again was white male Europeans. And since what we've done is we've extrapolated this equation that is basically just a ratio of your height and your weight and tried to put this on other populations, other races, where it's really not applicable. It's not a tool that we can start to really determine individuals' health and know that even in the different ranges that technically the quote unquote overweight range has lower mortality risks than even some of the normal and obviously low weight ranges. Your weight is determined by your genetics, just like your shoe size and your height. We've stopped foot binding, haven't we? Yeah, because that's weird. And yes, you can turn your genes and genetics on and off with certain behaviors, but they are the primary dictator of size, height, and physiology. This is where we start to get into Setpoint theory. So Setpoint theory is basically saying that based on our genetics and based on our previous ancestors, our bodies have a physiological set point to where there's a certain range, a weight range that our bodies are most comfortable in, that they will basically fight tooth and nail to stay within and try to not go out of. And so what happens in this realm is that if you were to overeat, under-exercise to a certain extent, your body would actually start to compensate slowly by making you move more without you even noticing in the day. So maybe it's tapping a foot. Maybe it's starting to fidget a little bit more in your seat. And on the flip side of that is if we're trying to intentionally lose weight, what will happen is that our body will start to conserve energy. And the way it will conserve energy is that it will start to actually lower our basal metabolic rate, so how much we're burning at rest. And as it starts to lower that, say in the sense of being on a diet, in this self-imposed restriction, is that we are telling our body that we are in an unsafe place and we are stressing it out, and we're telling our body that it needs to conserve energy because we are in an energy deficit. And so what will happen is that eventually our BMR, basal metabolic rate, will decrease. But then if we start to get off that diet, our body doesn't know that we are in a food available environment. It just thinks that, hey, you're not giving me enough, so therefore I'm starving. So then what it will do is keep that metabolic rate low so that it can start to adapt to this famine. And then it will actually start to stay there, even if we increase our calories, if it's not done very, very carefully. And you can actually start to see more weight gain time after time. And this is where the theory comes in of weight cycling, and we'll dive a little bit more into that too. Food insecurity is linked to higher rates of not only those being in larger bodies and quote unquote obese, but also higher rates of eating disorders. Specifically, binge eating disorder or binge purge eating disorders. This is because, again, food has been made unsafe. It wasn't always a sure thing that was in the household or accessible. And this may cause people to eat more than quote unquote normal, whatever that is, when there is access to food. So this happens all the time, whether it be because you're in a food insecure space, because maybe your family couldn't afford to have enough food and it came through places where there was a feast and then there were famine times. But then this is also when we see children put on diets, when there's, again, this food insecurity because kids don't get to choose their food. Their parents get to choose their food most of the time, and they're not in control. And so we see this binging and binge purge eating disorders more prevalent in those who were also put on diets when they were younger. All right, and then let's dive into food marketing. So food marketing in BIPOC communities, they're exposed to double the marketing of highly processed foods and less marketing of other healthful foods. So there in that is also problematic. So there's possibly a food insecurity or a food scarcity, but then what you may have access to may be these highly, highly processed foods that therefore you may eat more of, again, because you're in a calorie deficit that was, again, probably not self-imposed. And then let's talk about stress. So stress, in the sense of, from a physiological standpoint, is that when we are stressed, our bodies will actually use those as storage hormones. So if we think about insulin and cortisol, those are two specific storage hormones, storage of fat and storage of also glucose, so turning it into glycogen and saving it for later. So stress, whether that be systemic racism, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, not knowing if you are going to be able to pay the bills that month, all of these things are stress. And know that those are also going to start to shift and change our genetics and epigenetics over time. Also, the time to prepare healthful foods and to carve out time in your day to exercise and to move is a privilege in itself. Overall, for those who are trying to work on just getting food on the table and making sure that there's a roof covering their heads, they may or may not be able to, they will most likely not be able to figure out how they can carve in an hour of movement in their day. And so know that all of these privileges allow you to fulfill your genetics to their full expression. And this is how weight is determined by not just what you eat and how you move your body, but it's determined by so many other things that are completely out of our control. So let's start to look at what is health then, and how do we start to measure health if it's not related to weight. So one thing is biometrics. What are your lab values telling me? What is your blood sugar? What's your cholesterol? What's your blood pressure? What are all of these things telling me that are giving me a better picture as opposed to your size and shape? Because there are people who may be in smaller bodies who may have really high blood pressure, or who may even have diabetes. And then there's people who in larger bodies who may not have the biometrics that you would assume based on their body size. So biometrics are great. I utilize them all the time in my practice because they give me real data that I can actually track and intervene on. We can also start to look at how much time do you spend moving through space? So how much time do you spend exercising? Can we start to look at maybe making small goals through movement and through maybe minutes or time that's spent moving, as opposed to just prescribing weight loss. You can also start to track hydration. So hydration is really, really important. No, you do not have to drink a gallon of water a day, but for people who are maybe struggling with other healthful behaviors, this could be a really great way that we could start to measure actual health that may actually be impacting them. We could start to look at adequate intake. Are you actually eating enough, as opposed to not enough and suppressing your overall physiology? But are you eating enough? And also, are you eating enough of a balance and a variety of food? So are you eating enough fruits and vegetables and whole grains and proteins? But then also, are you eating enough of those things that connect you to your cultural sense of self, as well as the things that bring you joy and the things that make you happy? We can also start to look at hormone health. So for certain people, maybe they have a thyroid disorder. Maybe that would be one thing that we could start to track in relation to their hormones that's going to have a cascade of effects that's actually going to positively impact health. We can also start to measure and look at people's relationship to food and movement. So just because you're eating healthfully and moving a lot does not mean that you are healthy and that you have a good relationship to either of those things. We can measure sleep practices, we can measure alcohol intake, and one thing that I really love to measure in my athletes is how are they recovering from exercise and movement. So if I have an athlete in my office and we're working on fueling them adequately and properly, I always like to get a scale of their perceived recovery over time. Granted, we could look at insane lab samples and get glycogen in muscle tissue, but that's ridiculous. So instead, we could just start to look at what does recovery look and feel like to you, and what are some good measures for that. And like I mentioned, again, weight cycling and weight is really one way, well, weight specifically is one way that we have often been told to measure health. And weight cycling is overall going to stress out our physiology. And those who've been on diets and weight cycled have more adverse health outcomes, no matter their size or shape, than those who are in larger bodies who have never weight cycled or dieted. By focusing on weight, shape, and size as opposed to actual health, we are compromising individuals' relationship to food, mental health, and even our own physical health. So, how do we start to improve our relationship to food and our bodies? First of all, we need to look at minimizing the restrictions. So if you scroll through your Instagram or your TikTok, you will see all of these diets and cleanses and ways that other people are moving, and all of a sudden you think that you should be eliminating certain things and doing more. That's not necessarily the case. If you're actually starting to look at how do I have less anxiety with the food that I'm eating, or how do I have less anxiety around my body and movement, is we actually start to take away some of those barriers. And if we can minimize the amount of food that you're restricting while also tapping in and understanding your mental and physical cues of hunger and recovery and what you need, then by decreasing that restriction, we can actually find more freedom through food and also more freedom through how we move our bodies. This is a really good example I like to give individuals is, have you ever binged on rice or broccoli or overate too much of it? No, probably not. Have you ever binged on cookies or ate too much of it and felt guilty about it? Yeah, probably. Because again, that is our culture saying that certain foods are, quote, bad versus good. And that's, again, this paradigm that we've created. So if we can actually start to shift, because you've never restricted broccoli or rice in your life, unless you were super low carb, and then that's a whole nother thing. But you've probably never restricted those things before. So if we can start to do that with other things and just partake in foods that would have been off limit previously, we automatically remove that attachment. And I call it basically a unicorn in the corner. Once we say we can't have something, that's all we think about. And so if we can actually start to remove that unicorn in the corner and realize that it's just a horse and we can hang out with it whenever, then it's not as scary. A really good example of this too is having a cheat day. Like, when has cheating ever been okay? I bet if you cheated in class, you could probably get expelled from school, depending on the severity of it. And so cheating in school, cheating in your job, cheating on the field, cheating in life cheating on your girlfriend or boyfriend or partner has never been okay. So why should it be okay in relation to food and your body? So if we can start to get rid of that overall binge restrict cycle of binging on the quote unquote cheat days or restricting on the other days of the week, if we could just start to normalize more foods, then we would have a healthier relationship to them. We also need to understand our physical fullness and hunger cues as well. This is really difficult, especially if you've ever been on a diet or experienced some sort of famine or something like that, because again, our bodies have not necessarily evolved to know that we are in a food available environment. They just know that they either have enough or not enough food. So it's important to understand what are those subtle cues of hunger, of maybe you're anxious, maybe you're cold, maybe you get cranky, maybe your stomach grumbles, maybe it doesn't. And then what are those fullness cues and a feeling of satiety when you're eating? When are you done? What are those early signs of that too? And once you can start to tap into some of those things, then you can really start to tap into what your body needs and what feels best. It's also important to look at food as much more than fuel. A lot of times people can maybe improve their relationship to food once they come from a place of restriction and realize that their body actually needs fuel. But by just saying food is fuel, we're also discounting the fact that it is also our connection to our culture, it is our connection to ourselves, and it is our connection to our community. But it is also an emotional thing. And emotional eating gets a really, really bad rap. I don't have time to go into it completely today, but know that food should be emotional. Food should bring us joy. Food may be the only thing we have access to in those 2 minutes that we feel really, really stressed out. And so, no, you shouldn't just eat in response to emotions. We should get to the root cause of what you're actually feeling in that moment. But sometimes food can be that much needed break for that initial just moment to pause. We also need to look at how do we start to build trust in our bodies. So how do we start to build trust in knowing that we will be able to self-regulate when we're moving, that we're not going to wreck ourselves all of the time in a workout or something like that. And also know that we can also trust our bodies to tell us when they need to move and when they're not feeling good because they haven't moved enough. We also can start to build trust again in ways of tapping into what are those subtle cues of hunger? What are those foods that actually make us feel good and feel full? And if we can start to build trust in that, then we will start to minimize restriction and start to improve our relationship to food and our bodies. Because that's really what a lot of dieting does, is it basically tells us that we do not know enough and that we are not in charge of our bodies and should not be trusted with our bodies, which is completely false. Another thing, because body image is a complete societal structure, and right now, especially in the realms of COVID and the pandemic, is that we spend a lot of time in social media and in online platforms where we are bombarded with persistent messaging of you need to change, your body needs to be different, you should move like this, or you should eat like this, where it's really, really important to start to shift your worldview if you want to start to improve your relationship to food and your body. We can do that by doing a simple social cleanse. This is the only cleanse I will ever tell someone to do. But again, this is basically just taking your social media, and it's, again, not totally turning it off or completely disengaging in it, because again, that is a binge restrict behavior. But can we start to have a better, more healthful relationship to it by cultivating what we see, cultivating, unfollowing, muting. The unfollow is the most powerful thing you could do. But if you can't unfollow your sister, maybe you just mute your sister for a little bit. So can we start to actually shift our worldview of what we are bombarded with and spend hours with every single day, and then start to engage in things that are more positive in an online setting? Body dysmorphia and social media go hand in hand. Body dysmorphia thrives on social media. You've all seen all the things about how things are photoshopped or cropped or filters, and it's just important to know that, as you know, it's not reality, and you shouldn't hold yourself to that standard. We also need to find neutrality around movement in our bodies. So this is not saying that you have to love your body and that through this you're going to wake up every single day and feel like you have a great relationship to food and love everything and everything's going to be awesome. But we just need to look at things with neutrality, whether that be food, and not saying that it is either good or bad, but it is just food, whether that be a hamburger or a salad. Food is food. It is calories, it is protein, it is fat, it is carbs. Can we also find neutrality around movement, knowing that a walk may be just as good as doing a really, really intense HIIT workout, depending on what you need that day. So all of these things are not good nor bad, and we just need to find this neutrality around our bodies, knowing that they are not good nor bad, but they're just bodies. That's what they are. Food is not good or bad. Movement is not good or bad in any way, shape, or form. We just need to start to shift and find that space in between. We also need to look at minimizing body comments about yourself and others. We are so much more than our bodies, and your body is not your worth. And we need to normalize this. And how we can normalize this is by not commenting on other people's bodies. So if you remember back to what body image is, of those maybe comments and ideas when you were younger that people told you about your body before you even thought about body image, but have stayed with you, know that all the things that we say have power, and the words that we say have power. We also need to stop being completely hypercritical of ourselves, because if you think about it, think about, I don't know, one of your friends. How often do you think about their body? Probably not very often. But if you think about how often you think about your body, probably multiple times a day, if not all day, every day. And I want you just to remember that no one is as critical as you. No one really cares about your body shape or size. So it's really important to take off this hypercritical lens. We need to step away from the mirror. I even prescribe to a lot of my patients to not mirror check or to take mirrors out of their room, especially if it's of their body and maybe they need to shave in the mirror or do their makeup or whatever, and that's fine. But we need to stop nitpicking every single little thing, because our bodies will change. That's the only thing we can know that they will do every single day and throughout years and decades. So we need to start to really sit with that and accept that our bodies are going to change. They're not going to change positively or negatively drastically in one day or 1 week or 1 month or even a quarter of a year. So it's just important to take off that hypercritical lens and know that, yes, you can want to change your body, but it needs to be from a place of actual health and concern about health, as opposed to what our society is saying you should do. All right, so a lot of you had questions on how do you help yourself with either struggling with your own body image, or how do you help someone else? And first and foremost, before you help anyone else, you need to be able to get right with yourself. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. That doesn't mean you're always going to say the right thing. That doesn't mean that you have to be the epitome of hashtag body positivity or whatever, but you need to be also doing this work for yourself, especially if you're going to be going into a health or wellness related field. You need to work on your relationship to your body and food so that you're not ingraining disordered eating, disordered body image, body dysmorphia into future patients or clients. It's important to also know that when I wanted to give just a few scenarios here, because a lot of you asked on like, how do I help someone who's quote unquote obese lose weight, or tell them that they need to lose weight? And first and foremost, I want to note that you don't need someone to lose weight. You should never tell someone to lose weight. You should not be commenting on either your body, fishing for compliments, or someone else's body. Because if we think back to, again, what forms our image of our bodies, they may have never ever thought that about themselves or seen them that way. But by you saying something, it's going to start to shift their relationship to their body too. So again, you won't always be perfect. You won't always say the right thing. But if we can start by not commenting on bodies in general, then that's a huge step. Instead, you can just check in, especially if they're a friend or a loved one, and you can ask, how are you doing? That's huge, right? So instead of commenting on someone's body, where basically the end of that conversation is, oh, thanks, or oh, I hadn't noticed, or thanks for saying that, or whatever, even if it's a positive comment, know that that's going to be shut down and that's a conversation ender. But asking how someone is doing may actually open up a whole lot more information that you can actually gather and start to make some real change with. Also, commenting on someone's body, whether it be positive of like, oh man, did you lose weight or whatever, you could unintentionally be commenting on a huge grief or death in the family, a huge trauma that has made them completely lose their appetite. You could be commenting on an eating disorder because they're struggling with so much anxiety right now. So know that by commenting on somebody's weight, shape, or size is never a positive thing. And then again, if you're either shaming yourself or someone else to move or change the way that they eat, that's also not helpful. Another way that we can start to shift that is again just asking if they won't help. Maybe not even help, but hey, do you want to go on a walk if you feel like your friend doesn't get enough activity? Of make a walking date. If you want to help implement and change someone eat in a more healthful way, maybe you make a dinner date with them and you have, whether it be an in-person or even just a Zoom cooking session where you're going to incorporate a little bit more fruits or vegetables. There's a mountain of evidence that indicates that shaming and guilting people into changing their behaviors is never ever helpful. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable because again, they're not understanding of why and how this is benefiting them. So now we are basically all adults, generally all adult learners. So we need to understand why and also have it be modeled of how we can start to shift and change. So be that model, ask real questions, and that's how we can start to make change. Some of you also asked about how to address weight gain during the pandemic or body shifts during the pandemic. And I just want to take a note and state that yes, our schedules have changed, which probably means that maybe our bodies have changed a little bit too. But this is because we're in a global pandemic that has killed millions of people. And we mentioned that stress will deeply impact how our bodies shift and change. And the last year has been stressful for every single person that I know. There's very, very few people that I've talked to that are like, I'm floating on cloud nine. And so this is going to impact how we relate to food, how we move our bodies. If you're completely immobilized by stress and anxiety, maybe you're not going to want to move as much, or depression. So instead of worrying about your weight and your size, I want you to start thinking about and worrying about how are you actually taking care of yourself through this time and also in the future. Are you looking at stress management? Are you meditating? Are you getting help where you need it? Are you going to therapy? If you have a rampant eating disorder because of you feel like you're out of control with food right now, are you seeing a dietitian? Are you getting the help that you need? Are you moving in your day to give you a break from your screen, especially because all of you are in school and we all need that break to breathe and disconnect. So I would rather ask you, instead of giving you tips of how to change your workout or how to change your meals or things like that, of really how are you actually taking care of your true physical and mental and emotional health. All right, so let's start to wrap up here. And hopefully some things you were able to take away is that you cannot determine someone's health by their size or shape of their body. You just can't. We can determine it by their biometrics, maybe their actions, maybe the way that they move through their day, but we cannot determine it by size alone. You can change your relationship to your body and food and movement, and you have the power to do that, but it's going to take some work and it's going to take you asking a lot of really deep and hard questions. We also need to stop idealizing bodies when we really have no control over them. Really, when we take into account of genetics and our epigenetics and all of these other things that determine how our bodies look, no matter how much we want blue eyes, if you have brown eyes, you probably can't change them unless you get contacts. So we have no control over our bodies, really. Yes, we can do the best that we can by eating in ways that make us feel good and moving in ways that make us feel good and actually looking at our genetics and understanding our family medical history. But that's not going to get us the body that you see on Instagram because we have no control over it. You don't need to change your body, and you need to start to look at changing your relationship to it. That's the important thing, is that if you're really starting to struggle with body image and things like this, we need to take a step back. And I always love to ask people if they've been going through their day and all of a sudden they have a very negative thought or go down a spiral of what changed. What did you see? What did you just interact with? What did someone say? What did you see on social media? What was that trigger that sent you down that negative spiral? And we need to start to shift that relationship to our bodies. And lastly, reach out. If you feel like you really need help with either an eating disorder, disordered body image, body dysmorphia, reach out. Whether that be help from me. I know that NU Counseling is also doing free counseling right now through the pandemic, through telehealth. So reach out if you need help. All of these problems are important, and your worth is not determined by your body. And know that you are worthy of actually getting help and finding freedom through your relationship to food and your body.